The chains were cold against his wrists. Commander Marcus Cole stood in the center of the crystalline palace, surrounded by 1,000 alien eyes that watched him like he was an insect under glass. The floor beneath his boots was made of something that looked like black glass but felt alive, pulsing with a faint warmth that made his skin crawl. He had been a prisoner for 3 days now. 3 days since the Velithari warships had surrounded his vessel, the Defiant Hope, and demanded surrender. 3 days since he had watched his crew of 200 souls marched into holding cells on an alien world. 3 days of wondering if any of them would ever see Earth again. Now he stood before the throne of the Velithari Imperium, and he understood why every species in the known galaxy feared this place. The throne room was massive. Pillars of crystal rose toward a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. Between the pillars stood the noble houses of the Imperium, thousands of insectoid beings with shells that gleamed like precious stones. They had compound eyes that reflected the light in fractured patterns of purple and gold. Their bodies were elegant, almost beautiful in a terrifying way. They moved with a grace that reminded Marcus of dancers or perhaps predators, but none of them mattered. Only the figure on the throne mattered. Empress Silthari, the Eternal, rose from her seat, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. She was 8 feet tall, her body covered in a shell of deep violet that seemed to absorb the light around her. Her 4 arms moved with liquid grace as she stepped down from the throne. A cloak of living starlight draped across her shoulders, tiny points of light moving and swirling like a galaxy in miniature. She had ruled this empire for 3,000 years. Her species had conquered 11 galaxies. They had broken civilizations that had existed for millions of years. They had made beings who called themselves gods bow before them. And now she stood before Marcus Cole, a human from a small blue planet that had only discovered faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. "Do you know why you are here, human?" Her voice was strange. It came from her mouth, but it also seemed to come from everywhere at once. Marcus felt it in his bones, in his blood, in the deepest parts of his brain. "I imagine you're going to tell me," he said. A ripple went through the crowd. The nobles shifted, their compound eyes blinking in what Marcus guessed was surprise. He supposed prisoners did not usually talk back. The Empress tilted her head, studying him like a scientist might study a new specimen. "Your ship entered our space without permission. Your species has no treaties with us, no agreements. You are nothing to us, less than nothing, a larval species barely crawling among the stars." "We meant no disrespect." Marcus kept his eyes forward, but he tracked her movement in his peripheral vision. He had faced hostile situations before. He had negotiated with pirates, survived a reactor meltdown, and once talked his way out of a standoff with a species that communicated entirely through violence. But this was different. This was something ancient and powerful and completely beyond his experience. "I have ruled for 3,000 years, the Empress said, stopping in front of him. "In that time, I have brought 11 galaxies under my banner. I have ended species that threatened us. I have shaped the course of evolution itself. And in all that time, every species I have encountered has learned the same lesson." He felt it in his legs, an overwhelming urge to bend, to drop to his knees, to bow his head and submit. His heart raced. Sweat broke out on his forehead. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to give in, to kneel, to surrender. The Empress smiled, her mandibles parting to reveal rows of crystalline teeth. "The Velithari compulsion, a gift of evolution. It triggers the submission response in any species. No one can resist it. The Kron, with their ships the size of moons, knelt. The mindweavers of Andros, who could reshape reality with their thoughts, knelt. Gods have knelt before me, human." The pressure was immense, a weight on his soul that demanded surrender. He thought of his crew, 200 people who trusted him to bring them home. He thought of his daughter on Earth waiting for him to come back. He thought of every human who had ever refused to give up, who had ever stood against impossible odds, who had ever looked at the darkness and said no. His knees stopped bending. His spine straightened. He lifted his head and looked the Empress directly in her ancient alien eyes. And then he laughed. It was not a nervous laugh or a frightened laugh. It was a genuine laugh, full of something that the Velithari had not heard in 12,000 years. It was the laugh of a man who had found something funny in the face of death. "Not today, Your Majesty. I appreciate the offer, but I think I'll stay standing if it's all the same to you." For the first time in 12,000 years, a creature has looked upon the throne of the Velithari and said no. She turned back to Marcus, and now he could see something new in her ancient eyes. It was not anger, it was not even annoyance. It was something closer to curiosity, tinged with something else. It almost looked like respect. "Take him to the research wing," she commanded. "Do not harm him. I want to know everything about this species." She paused, looking at Marcus one last time. "I want to know what makes a human say no." And in his experience, curiosity was always the first step toward understanding. The research wing of the Crystalline Palace was not what Marcus had expected. He had imagined dark cells, torture devices, and scientists who would cut him open to see what was inside. Instead, he found himself in a room that was almost comfortable. The walls were smooth and warm, glowing with a soft light that changed color slowly. There was something like a bed, though it was shaped for a body very different from his own. There was food, strange but edible. There was even a window that looked out over an alien city that stretched to the horizon. But there were also the tests. The Velithari scientists came every day. They were smaller than the nobles, with shells of pale blue and eyes that seemed to look through him rather than at him. They attached devices to his head, scanned his body with instruments he did not recognize, and asked him questions in a language that a translator device turned into flat, emotionless words. "Tell us about your childhood." He told them about joining the space program, about meeting his wife, about holding his daughter for the first time. The scientists recorded everything, their mandibles clicking quietly as they entered data into their devices. On the 5th day, the Empress herself came to see him. She entered without guards, without attendants, without the living cloak of starlight. She looked smaller without it, though she was still much taller than Marcus. She stood by the window and looked out at her city for a long moment before speaking. "My scientists are confused," she said. "They have tested you in every way they know. They have scanned your brain, analyzed your blood, mapped your nervous system, and they have found nothing. Nothing. They evolved in every thinking creature, in every galaxy we have explored. Every biological signal said you should have fallen to your knees. They say no amount of willpower should have been enough to resist. My grandmother used to say that humans are too stupid to know when we're beaten." The alien city spread out before him, buildings of crystal and light that reached toward a sky with two suns. "We have a saying on Earth. It's not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. How much you're willing to sacrifice. How hard you're willing to fight, even when you know you might lose. And it said that I would rather die standing than live on my knees. And yet you stand before the Empress of 11 galaxies and tell me that you would rather die than submit. With respect, Your Majesty, you're missing the point. It's not about what you could offer us. It's not about power or knowledge or technology. It's about who we are. If I kneel to you today, I stop being the person I was meant to be. I stop being human." They stood in silence for a while, two beings from opposite ends of the universe, separated by thousands of years of evolution and millions of light years of space. "I have ruled for 3,000 years, she said finally. "I have seen species with technology that could destroy stars. I have seen beings with minds that could reshape reality. I have seen empires that spanned entire galaxies. And I have broken them all, not through strength alone, but through the compulsion. Through the simple truth that every creature, no matter how powerful, has an instinct to submit." She was no longer a scientist examining a specimen. She was a ruler making a decision. "Now we test the others," she said. "Your crew, 200 humans, you said. Perhaps you are an anomaly. Perhaps your resistance is unique, a mutation, a flaw in your particular biology. We will see if the others kneel when I command them. And if they don't, tomorrow we will see if your defiance is a gift of your species or merely a gift of yourself." He closed his eyes and thought of them, and he hoped with everything he had that they would remember what it meant to be human. The arena was vast. It had been built 10,000 years ago in the early days of the Imperium, and it had seen things that would have driven a human mind to madness. Battles to the death between conquered species. Executions of rebel leaders. Ceremonies where entire civilizations bent the knee and accepted Velithari rule. Now it would see something new. Marcus stood in a viewing box above the arena floor, his wrists still bound in chains. Below him, his crew was being led out onto the sand. 200 humans, still wearing the uniforms of the Defiant Hope, blinking in the harsh light of the alien suns. They looked small and fragile compared to the Velithari guards that surrounded them. They looked like children lost in a world too big and too strange for them to understand. But Marcus knew them. He knew Lieutenant Chen, who had once fought off a boarding party with nothing but a wrench and a bad attitude. He knew Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who had saved 17 lives during the reactor incident by running into the radiation zone when everyone else was running away. He knew Elena Vasquez, the ship's cook, who had never fired a weapon in her life but who made the best coffee in the fleet and always had a kind word for anyone who needed it. They were not soldiers, most of them. They were explorers, scientists, dreamers who had looked up at the stars and wanted to know what was out there. And now they stood in an alien arena, about to face a test that no human had ever faced before. The Empress entered the arena. She wore her cloak of living starlight, and she carried a staff that pulsed with a light that hurt to look at. Behind her came the noble houses, thousands of Velithari filling the seats of the arena, their compound eyes glittering with anticipation. This was entertainment to them. This was sport. They had come to watch a new species break. The Empress raised her staff, and silence fell. "Humans of the vessel Defiant Hope," she announced, her voice echoing through the arena. "Your commander has done something that has not been done in 12,000 years. He has refused the compulsion. He has refused to kneel. You will feel the compulsion. You will feel the urge to submit, and we will see if your commander's defiance was unique or if it is something that lives in all of you." They had no idea what was about to hit them. The Empress spoke, and this time her voice was not just sound. It was power. It was a force of nature, a command written into the fabric of reality itself. Kneel. It was 10 times stronger than what he had felt in the throne room. It was 100 times stronger. It was designed to break armies, to shatter nations, to bring gods to their knees. Below him, his crew staggered. Lieutenant Chen fell to one knee, his face twisted in agony. Dr. Tanaka grabbed her head and screamed. Elena Vasquez dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. All across the arena, humans were falling, their bodies betraying them, their minds screaming for them to submit. Marcus watched in horror. They were going to break. They were all going to break. He had been a fool to think that ordinary humans could resist what he had resisted. He had been lucky, nothing more, a freak, an anomaly, and then something changed. Lieutenant Chen, still on one knee, looked up. His face was red. Veins stood out on his neck. Every muscle in his body was trembling with the effort of resisting, but he was looking up. And in his eyes, Marcus saw something that made his heart swell with pride. It was anger. Chen slammed his fist into the sand and pushed himself up. He rose to his feet slowly, painfully, like a man climbing a mountain. His legs shook. His whole body shook, but he stood. "No," he said. His voice was quiet, but somehow Marcus heard it clearly. "No." Her arms trembled. Her back curved, but she pushed and she rose, first to one knee, then to both feet. "No," she said. One by one, the humans began to rise. Elena Vasquez, the cook who had never fought anyone in her life, wiped the tears from her face and stood up. "No," she whispered, and then louder, "No." 200 humans stood in the arena of the Velithari Imperium, tears on their faces, blood on their lips where they had bitten through their own flesh with the effort of resistance. They stood in the face of a power that had broken gods, and not one of them knelt. The Empress lowered her staff. The compulsion faded, and for a long moment there was absolute silence. Then the arena exploded. The nobles were screaming. Some were calling for the humans to be killed immediately. Others were pushing toward the exits as if human defiance was a disease they might catch. Guards raised their weapons. Advisors shouted at the Empress, demanding orders, but the Empress did not move. She stood in the center of the chaos, staring at the 200 humans who had done the impossible. Her compound eyes reflected their defiant faces, fractured into 1,000 images of something she had never seen before. In the viewing box, Marcus felt tears running down his own face. Not tears of sadness, tears of pride. These were his people. This was humanity, not perfect, not powerful, not special in any way that could be measured or quantified, but unbreakable. The Empress raised her hand and the chaos stopped. The nobles fell silent. The guards lowered their weapons. Everyone waited. She walked through the crowd of humans, looking at each of them as she passed. She stopped in front of Elena Vasquez, the cook, who was still trembling with the aftermath of the compulsion. "You are afraid," the Empress said. Elena nodded. "Yes. That's what humans do." Marcus could hear the chaos even from his cell. Shouts echoed through the corridors of the crystalline palace. Ships were launching from the capital, either fleeing or preparing for war. The noble houses had divided into factions, each one demanding a different response to the impossible thing they had witnessed. Half of them wanted the humans destroyed, not just killed, but erased. Their ship would be burned. Their home planet would be found and sterilized. Every trace of their species would be wiped from the universe, so that no one would ever know that a creature had looked upon the Velithari and refused to bow. The other half wanted something worse. They wanted to conquer Earth. They wanted to find out what made humans different and use it. They wanted to break the humans slowly, one by one, until they learned the secret of their resistance. And then they wanted to add that secret to their own power. Princess Vayathi, the Empress's own daughter, led this faction. She was younger than her mother by 2,000 years, ambitious and hungry in ways that the Empress no longer was. She saw humans not as a threat, but as an opportunity. A resource, a tool, and in the middle of it all the Empress sat alone in her private chambers, staring out at the city that was slowly descending into chaos. That was where Marcus found her when the guards brought him to her. The chamber was simpler than he had expected. No throne, no living cloak. Just a room with a window and a chair and the oldest creature Marcus had ever met, sitting with her 4 arms folded in her lap. "Leave us," she said to the guards. They hesitated. "Your Majesty, the human is dangerous, She continued to stare out the window at her burning city. "Do you know how old I am?" she asked. 3,000 years, you said. Small and weak, and hunted by every predator on our world. We survived by looking at the predators that hunted us and saying no. Not today, not us. We could conquer without war. We could rule without resistance. And then we met you?" The Empress turned to face him. "A species so young you have barely left your cradle. A species with no special abilities, no unique biology, no power that should have let you resist. And yet you stood. All of you stood." They were the movements of an old being who was very, very tired. "I have ruled for 3,000 years, Commander Cole. I have ended civilizations. I have shaped the course of history itself. And in all that time, I have never asked myself a simple question: what have we become?" Then she spoke, and her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Conquerors, tyrants, monsters who break the will of entire species because we can, because we forgot what it was like to be the ones who had to resist." She looked at him with something that might have been shame. "Your species has been among the stars for 50 years. In that time you have explored, you have discovered. You have reached out with curiosity instead of conquest. And when we tried to break you, you reminded us of something we lost long ago. Half my nobles want war and the other half want genocide. They are afraid of you, Commander Cole. They are afraid of what you represent. I want my people to remember that they were once more than conquerors. You will be free to return to your Earth. Consider it the beginning of something new. Tell them about the Velithari Imperium, and how we tried to make you kneel and how you refused. I will tear down the thrones we built on the broken backs of conquered species. I will teach them to stand again instead of forcing others to kneel." She looked at him. "It will not be easy. My daughter will fight me. My brother will fight me. Half my empire will fight me. Sometimes you fight even when you know you might lose. Sometimes you stand even when the universe tells you to kneel. Not a bow of submission, a bow of respect. I'll remember," he said, "and thank you, Your Majesty." The Defiant Hope hung in orbit above Earth, no longer the battered exploration vessel that had limped home 12 months ago. Velithari engineers had rebuilt her from the inside out, upgrading her engines, her weapons, her shields. She was still small by galactic standards, but she was no longer helpless, and she was no longer alone. Marcus stood on the bridge, watching the view screen as ship after ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Some were human vessels, the new fleet that Earth had been building ever since the Defiant Hope returned with its impossible story. Others were Velithari, their crystalline hulls gleaming in the light of Earth's sun. The alliance had been the Empress's idea. She had sent the message 6 months ago, offering humanity something that no species had ever been offered: partnership, not conquest, not submission. A true alliance between equals. Half of Earth had been terrified, the other half had been suspicious. But Marcus had spoken to the United Nations, telling them about the Empress he had met. Not the tyrant who had commanded him to kneel, but the ancient being who had remembered what it meant to stand. They had accepted. Now the Alliance fleet gathered above Earth, preparing for something that the galaxy had never seen. The Velithari Imperium was at war with itself, and the Empress had asked humanity for help. A communications signal beeped on the console. Marcus smiled when he saw who it was from. "Commander Cole," the Empress's voice came through the speakers. "It is good to see you again. I hear you've had some trouble." They have formed an alliance of their own, and they have sworn to destroy everything I have built. She handed one to Marcus and kept the other for herself. In the year since their return, she had become something of a celebrity on Earth, the cook who had stood up to an empire, the ordinary woman who had refused to kneel. She had hated the attention at first. Now she wore it like armor. "The fleet is assembled," she reported. "All ships report ready." It was perfect, as always. "Then I suppose it's time." Reasonable measures did not apply to humans. A new signal came through. The face of Princess Vayathi appeared on the screen, her compound eyes glittering with cold fury. "Mother," she said, "this is your last chance. Surrender the throne, abandon your alliance with the humans, accept that the old ways are the only ways. And we will show mercy." A memory of a throne room where a human had laughed in the face of impossible power. A memory of an arena where 200 humans had refused to fall. "They offer me something you have forgotten, daughter," the Empress said. "They offer me the courage to stand when the universe tells me to kneel." Across the void, the enemy fleet began to move. Marcus turned to face his crew. They were looking at him with expressions he knew well: fear, determination, hope. These were the same people who had stood in that arena 1 year ago. They had faced the full power of the Velithari compulsion and refused to bend. This was just another arena. This was just another test. "All hands," he said, his voice carrying through the ship. "This is Commander Cole. 1 year ago we were prisoners. 1 year ago we were told to kneel, and 1 year ago we said no." Tanaka, who had volunteered to serve as medical officer for this mission, even though she had never wanted to be a soldier. "Today, we fight alongside the Velithari. Today, we fight for an empress who learned from us what it means to stand. Today, we fight for a galaxy that can choose something other than conquest and submission." It was not a loud cheer, not the roar of an army charging into battle. It was something quieter but somehow stronger. It was the sound of people who had already faced the impossible and won. "All ships," Marcus said into the fleet-wide channel. "This is Commander Cole of the Defiant Hope. Begin attack." The Alliance took heavy losses in the first hour. The enemy fleet was skilled and ruthless, and they had every advantage. But the humans did not break. They flew into the heart of the enemy formation, their small ships weaving between the massive Velithari cruisers. They fought when they should have run. They held positions when they should have retreated. They saved each other when they should have saved themselves, and slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn. The Empress's loyalists, inspired by the human example, fought harder than they had ever fought before. They remembered what their species had once been. They remembered the fire that had made them survivors instead of prey. When the battle ended, the enemy fleet was broken. Princess Vayathi had fled into deep space. The Empress's brother had surrendered. The Alliance had won. Marcus stood on the bridge of the Defiant Hope, looking out at the aftermath of the battle. Debris floated everywhere, the remains of ships that had been destroyed. But among the debris, Alliance vessels were moving, rescuing survivors, providing aid. A message came through from the Empress. "Commander Cole, my people owe you a debt we can never repay." What do your people say at moments like this, when the battle is won, when the impossible has been achieved? But right now, I think the best thing to say is this: not today. A promise that no matter what the universe throws at you, you will stand up and try again. Not ever again,